Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks, Josh. As mentioned, we're here from Wix. Since we have you here hosted at Wix Playground, we'd be very happy to take this opportunity and showcase our new offering for developers. So it's called Codux, but just before we're going to start talking about the product itself, even though we were introduced already, we're going to introduce ourselves. So, I'm Omer Kenet. I lead the product. Here with me today from Tel Aviv, Israel, Peter Shershov and Tom Raviv. There. It's a long way. We work at Wix in a team that is very focused on developer tools, very technical. We have some open source projects. We have several products. Codux is one of them. We're going to show it to you today. We're going to do a live demo, so we hope it's going to go well. We believe it will. So let's talk about what brought us here today. So components, and in general, we're all using them. I don't really need to mention that for this audience. It's a great way to work. We're relied on it. The isolation, encapsulation, reusability, it's an amazing way of working. But we can't really say that our day-to-day lives or our work is as streamlined or as easy or comfortable as it could be. Now it starts with the fact that we're using text. We're using code to describe a visual thing. Now that's programming essentially. It doesn't matter if you're writing an app or a website. We are using usually text to describe these visual things, things that should render, be shown to users. Now usually when we're working on those visual things, we collaborate, right? A lot of time is wasted on design. We are working with other team members, and we're always connected, right? So a lot of time is wasted on design. When working over there, then that being handed off to development, right? So while we're doing the development, we hand it off back to design or QA to test it on different tools, different environments. A lot of time was wasted on those processes. Now, that means that we're ending up with many sources of truth, right? All along this process, all of these different personas that we work with create those different sources of truth, whether it's the design tool, the product manager tool, the IDE, it doesn't really matter. If we're doing some change at some point of that process, it will somehow need to kind of cascade into all of the others. So we'll all have a sense of reality. Now that can obviously be very complex to work with, and that's where we believe that Codux can be very helpful for you. So our vision, what we're trying to do, we want to create a consistent, predictable, and to be honest, an enjoyable environment to edit React components. In our environment, you have one place for collaborating over UI, so all of your team members can work within the real thing on top of the source that eventually goes to production. Now that means quicker turnovers, right? So we have less handoffs, means less meetings, means that we can hopefully focus more on coding, what we're here to do to push our products forward. Okay, so with that, allow me to introduce Codux. So Codux is a visual IDE for React. Now when we say visual IDE, we mean it. It is an integrated development environment. Just like the IDEs that you know, you can edit your code freely, of course. You can run scripts, you can manage Git, all of that, but we have our very own visual layer that is built on top of that, on top of the code. Now in Codux, the code is the only source of truth. We are working with your code. There's nothing that we're translating. We're working with your React, with your TypeScript code, with your style code. Nothing should be translated. That means we have no dirty or intermediate code. We don't need to translate anything from one thing to the other. We're just working with your source. It's just like an IDE, just like you know it. Components can be as simple or as complex as you need them to be. At the end of the day, they're just components. We're just an environment to render it however you need them to be. If your app requires some more complex cases, they can be achieved in Codux. If you need just a simple case, that can obviously be achieved as well. And at the end of it, you work locally and you can take it anywhere you want. So you deploy anywhere. It's your code, it's your thing. You can decide what you want to do with it once you're done. Where do you want it to be hosted? Where do you want it to be deployed? Okay, so in terms of the supported stack, so I kind of mentioned that we are relying on React components written in TypeScript. TypeScript really helps us provide a really good editing experience. You'll see it in a second. Our styling solutions that we support are CSS and CSS modules, Sass and Sass modules. Stylable. Stylable is an open source project that we've built within our team. It's a really cool CSS preprocessor. We use it a lot for Codux project. We use it a lot at Wix. All of you who are interested, we will be here at the end answering questions about Codux, about Stylable, about anything you'd want to talk about. So feel free to join us over there.
An alternative to Sass?
Sorry?
Is that an alternative to
Yeah,
Sass?
yes it is. It's an open source. It is built in our team, and you're welcome to come by and ask. We'd love to show you some of the examples.
It's amazing.
He's in the selling part of the thing. Okay, and the upcoming support, Tailwind. So ever since the launch of the product, we did get a lot of requests to support Tailwind, and we obviously want to do that, and we're now kind of trying to figure out what would be the best experience within Codux and how should it actually work. Okay, so let's get started with the demo. So we're going to do a live demo. We've created this demo project. It's called Codux. It's a Git service provider. It's a new startup, very similar to GitHub with all of those shiny features of code reviews, pull requests, developer collaboration. Obviously, it's a fake project. Yeah, we've made it up for this demo, but it kind of represents a real project, a real use case that I believe that you can kind of connect to. What we're going to do, we got a redesign request. So our product and design team have wanted us to kind of redesign this whole layout. We want to make the connections between developers a bit more prominent. And this is what we're going to do. So we're going to kind of change the structure of this thing, and we're going to redesign this button, and we're going to do it together with Codux. So let's go. So this is the project picker. This is kind of the homepage of Codux. You can see these are the recent React applications that Peter was working on. Nothing too fancy except for the fact that they're all React and TypeScript projects. Now, we're going to edit Codux, but let's take a look at the code of Codux just before we're going to start. So you can see that it's basically a React project as you know it, right? So we have a package.json, tsconfig, source files, components, style sheets, node modules. We're using some libraries, import some of the stuff. So it's basically a React application as you can all probably know it. Now, when moved to Codux, you can see the same application, slightly more visual approach. So on the left, these are the components from the project. These were automatically scanned. These are the ones that I've been recently working on. Now on the center, the boards. Boards is just a way to render components, an entry point to render components and pass data to it if we want to. But we want to take a look at the project itself. So let's see how does this project looks like just for a second. Okay, so this is the app component. Now, you can see the first thing that is what we do here within the editor environment of Codux is that we show you the rendering of it. We call that the stage. The stage is here to render your code in the specific state. Now the stage is useful not only to see the rendering, it's also useful to navigate and feel up the product, feel up the component as if I'm a user, as if I'm consuming it. So every style interaction will be triggered, every state will be triggered if it's based on user interaction. So this is how I can feel the product. But at the same time, I can use it to navigate. So I can basically go within the stage to choose the different components or elements that this application is built out of. So you can see that I have different elements here that at the end of the day are built to create this app component. Now, this can be done from the stage or from the elements tree. The elements tree is a representation of the structure of your component. You can see that I have HTML elements, components from my project or from third-party libraries if they are used, and expressions, things that cause other elements to appear, disappear, behave in a certain way. So it's a combination of the DOM structure and your source code, but in this visual approach, kind of a summary of what happens here, how these things are built. Okay, so that was just like an overview, but what we want to do happens in our top bar component. So we're going to go there and start doing some of the changes that we want to do. So these are the boards that I've previously created that represent some states of the top bar component. Let's get into one of them.
What representation of states, where are they saved?
Sorry?
Where are are those state representations saved?
So basically those states are boards. I've kind of touched it a little bit. We'll see it later on, but those are files on your machine. So it all works with files on your machine, and you can just set the states however you want them to be. You can pass data to them, props. We'll see it in a second. Okay, so as you can see on the right side, the props of this component. This is how you can basically pass on different data structures to it. It could happen with context or direct interface of that component, but this is the props of this component. Now, what we want to do happens within the top bar component, right? We want to actually change the structure of that component. So we're going to drill into that scope. We can see that it's built out of these different elements, right? And we see the code, we kind of know it. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to change the structure. I'm just going to drag this, Peter is going to drag the component. And what we can see here is that it's just relocated in the JSX structure. Second thing that we're going to do is we're going to edit the style of that component. Now that happens within the connect button component, so we're going to drill into that scope as well. And we're going to do some style changes. On the right side, we have our style editing panels. So the first one would be the computed style. The computed style is, just like you may know it, a representation of the styles that are currently applied on this element in this specific state. Okay, so it's a very good way for us to see kind of what happens at the end of the day, what are the styles that are applied on this element, but it's also a very good tool to navigate. If I'll click the edit button, it will take me to our style editing panel, our CSS editor. Now you can see that I was already automatically selected on this button selector. This was where this style was declared, the background color. So I was automatically selected for the selector and drilled to the background controller. The first thing that we're going to do, we're going to change the background color. So it was using a fixed RGB value. We don't like that. We're going to use a variable. Now these are the variables from my project. Again, I didn't really need to go anywhere. I just have them here and I can just use them however I want. Second thing that we're going to change, the color of the text, right? So that was the color was white. Here we're going to use the variable once again. And let's check that everything works fine. Now, I already know that it does not. We didn't fix the hover, so we're going to do that quickly. Let's start with locking the element on the hover state. Now, once I lock it, I can see that A, it renders in that state, and B, I'm shown with the selector that represents the state. Now, if I wouldn't have it already written in my CSS, it would offer me to create one. Same here, we're going to change the background color according to the design, the fake design, obviously. And when I'm unlocking it, I can now see how it actually looks. So let's, again, test it out, see that the behavior looks well. This is the design that I wanted. I'm kind of done with the first thing. So what I'll do now is I'm going to make sure that I didn't break anything. I make sure that it all looks good on those different states that I've created. And in my app component, this is where I'm using this top bar component. Looks great, right? I didn't break anything, all looks good. All I have left to do is to commit and push my changes. So as I said, Codux work with files on your machine. So you can manage Git however you use to manage Git. If you're used to doing it from your terminal or from IDE, that's perfectly fine. You can do it from Codux as well, but it's just at the end of the day works with your files, so Git flows are up to you. Okay, so that was the first thing that we wanted to do. We handed it off back to our team members, developers to review, designers to make sure that the design is aligned, product managers, content, whatever. All are happy, but we did get another request. So the second thing that we want to do is not only to connect those developers, we also want to show how many connections does each have. Now, again, I'm making it all up, but for this case, we're going to create a new component. So this is a brand new component. When I'm clicking the Create New Component button, I'll be offered to give it a name and to choose a template. Now, templates can be whatever you want them to be. Any specific structure of a component, common case, things that you need to be in each of your components, files imported, custom structures, this can all be done from your templates. So this is the very basic structure of this component. Now I can see that I was created with a board, coming back to your question before. So the board is what renders my component. I can pass data to it. And a component file. This is the TypeScript file of that component. And a style sheet, so we can use it now to style our component. let's start adding elements to the structure, right? Because this is like really, really basic. So we're gonna click the add button. And as you can see, we have our add panel, kind of contains HTML elements, components from my project, or components from third-party libraries. In this case, we're using Bootstrap, but it could be any library that you're using. We're just using that for the demo. And I'm gonna drag the first component. So it's gonna be an icon component. Now, once I drag it to the elements tree, I can see that it was imported to the file and added to the structure where I added it to. But it doesn't render. And it doesn't render because we have this error indication saying that we have a missing required property value. Now, this is just the component. We didn't really do anything here. We're kind of extracting the props and show you the issues that this component has. But once I pass the value that it expects, you can see that it renders as expected, and the structure and the JS6 structure doesn't have the error anymore. Second thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a text node. Now, this would be used to represent the amount of followers this user has. Obviously, this would have to be a dynamic value. We don't want to have a fixed text here, so we'll expose it as a property. Now, this can be done from this IDE, from your own IDE, but it will happen in code. We do believe that some actions are still meant to happen in code. Things that cause behavior, interactions, all of those are done from code, and we're perfectly fine with that. And yet, at the end of the day, a lot of the actions that you're doing today from code can be much more efficient, quicker, and even more nice to do when doing visual. So Peter is exposing this count property to kind of show the count of connections this user has. And you can see that now I'm shown that the 0 number is here. So it kind of looks good. This is what I wanted to create. Last thing to do would be to fix the layout. So we're going to create this basic flex layout in this case. We don't want nothing too complex. We're going to make sure that items are aligned to center. And we're going to give it a bit of a flex gap, like 3 pixels. And that looks like our design, right? So let's just add that to the structure of the top bar, just like before. In the add panel, we'll now see our new component, the connections component. It scans and finds all of the components from your project, even the ones that you've just created. And when I drag it in, I see that it is added to the structure. Now, in this case, it's not showing any data, right? It shows the default value. It's not connected to the data that comes from this top bar component, from the props, or from a context here. But Peter can connect it, again, something that is done by code. From the props panel, you can always jump to the place in code that you want to change or to edit. This can be done from any of the visual panels. You have a quick access from the rendering or from the visual representation to the place in code. You can do it either from this IDE or yours. It all works in a sync way. Okay, so that was the last action. Now, let's just make sure that everything looks good in our different boards, in our app component. Looks like we're done. You can see, by the way, that now that it's used in the app component, it shows the data that comes from this app component or the board of this app. Just like before, all we have left to do would be to commit and push our changes. Again, this can be done however you use to manage Git. We want to get a review from the team members, so this would be the last action for today. And with that, we're pretty much done with what we wanted to show you regarding the demo. So obviously, it was a pretty simple example, but it can be used for a lot of more complex cases. We're using Codux to build Codux, and it's a very complex environment. And we're out. We're just getting started. We're brand new. We've launched our beta like a month ago, so really exciting times for us. And we'd be very, very happy if you join our community. You can follow us on Twitter, join the Discord, hear about what's coming up, and of course, you can download it. It's free for you to use. You can all download it from our website and use it and try to see what it can do. It can work with your existing React applications. You can just run them within Codux. You can create new ones. So yeah, try it out, and most important, reach out. Tell us what you think. We're very much keen to hear as much feedback as we can. We're getting started, and any thought, feedback, anything that you feel like missing, would be very happy to hear that. So we'll have a bit of time for questions right now, I think, right? And again, we'll be sitting there at the end of the event. So any of you who are interested to see a bit more about what Codux can do or ask us anything, we'll be very happy. Thanks. Any questions?
Hi, thank you.
Hey.
I have a question. It's super cool. I'm curious how you see designers interacting with it, and what's your vision for how this tool kind of changes that passover between like developers and designers?
So that's a really good question. Well, I'll start with the fact that our design team is using Codux to manage front end in many of the cases. So we definitely see designers using it, and we're aiming there later on. We still see that there are some challenges for a lot of the designers. Some designers are more technically oriented and are kind of aware of how these technologies work, but there is like this barrier of entry. You need to understand how these things work in the basic level at least. So in terms of timing, we will definitely want to go there and add some more abstractions on top of that, but designers who are more like technically oriented can already use it. Our design team is using it completely.
Does that mean they have to know how to like commit Git changes?
Well,
Like technical?
so the committing Git changes was not the most challenging part of our designers. It was more like the understanding of how React works, how does it work with like states and styling, and how do they work with another, and like a lot of complexities about like the basics of how the web works. So that's like the only step that you'll have to do in order to start using Codux. Using Git is kind of a simpler abstraction, so we saw that they could immediately start with that. There were no problems there.
Challenges are like in CSS, selectors, classes, stuff they don't really know about, but yeah, it's happening. And designers opening PRs on our product, which is crazy. Yeah.
Simple question. I seen that you was able to add the bootstrap in there, right? I don't like bootstrap. I use a different. I use
No problem.
I use Manti. How would I be able to incorporate
Uh,
Manti with that?
So we don't have any specific dependency on Bootstrap or any other library. It works with code as code works, so you can run basically any project, and any library should work. I'll be very happy to hear if you had any issues, but your own library should work. We have all of the documentation in our site about how to run your own code and how to work with your own libraries and all of that, so just try it out. Yeah, we have a question right here.
Kind of follow-up question. Were your design team able to completely not do mocks anymore, or is that in addition to doing the mocks in a different application?
Well, that's a process. So they started with like trying to understand how it works, and then as the more they got used to thinking web and not thinking static design files or like thinking just about their design, the more they didn't need to use mocks. They could just kind of go straight away to the real thing, interact with the actual components, see the limitations. Obviously, some of those processes start still with a design tool. Yeah, just like pen and paper are still a thing that we start with what we want to think. We don't want to have all of these limitations when we're in the thinking process. But once they go into like implementing and things get more like ready to go to production, yeah, we see them go to code way faster.
So the goal is basically to eliminate Figma and other tools from the workflow, right?
So not necessarily, not at all. As I said, there are like different points in time, and that's okay to be in a point in time where you're thinking in a simpler way. I don't have to think about the web limitations when I'm trying to kind of figure out what would be the best way to work or what would be the best solution for this experience. Obviously, we believe that many of these things should happen closer to the truth, right? So we want them to stay closer to the real limitations of the web. Yeah, so the more Codux will be kind of abstracted, I believe that we'll have less dependencies on other tools, but again, it's not necessarily removing it completely.
And I have another question. In the demo you showed, so basically you show like the entire app component with everything in it. In a real scenario, obviously, this is going to be like data fetched from some asynchronous request. Um, when you did the demo, is it actually like running the app, or is like a presets of states? Like how does that work? How does the presets of states work with Codux?
It's mocked. It's everything is actually in mock, but in how to say it, your application, you have the actual options like actually having APIs connected into your app or board, let's say, and have actual like information on your stage.
So if I try to run it with Codux, will it actually like do all the requests, like it actually runs the app?
Yeah.
And what about the like different presets you have for like the top bar? Is that part of the app code?
No, so those are boards, if I understand your question correctly. Boards are just files that render components. There's just components that render components within them, but they allow you to pass mock data. So with that mock data, you can see different permutations of those components. So that was just like 3 mocks for the different cases of this top bar component.
Right, so the designer can work with the board mock data mostly.
Sorry, can you?
So the idea is that designer can work with the board basically.
Oh
mock
no,
data.
not at all. We want to see TypeScript file, like the component TypeScript file being edited and style sheets being edited. Board is not what we want people to edit within Codux. It's just a way for you to render a component in a state. If I want to edit this state of that component, I'll have to see it, right? I'll have to kind of make sure this component is showing the state that I want to edit. If I want to edit an error state or something, I'll need to make sure, first of all, that I see the error, and then I'll see the elements that represent the error. So a board is just a way to pass data and get to those states, but what we see that our users doing is editing the component themselves with those states, not just the boards.
Essentially, it's an entry point into your component. And it's a file who's like rendering your component.
So I think we have time for one more question. And again, we'll be here at the end, and we're very happy to hear all of those questions. So come by. We have, I think, one more question over there.
Hi. Thank you for the presentation, first of all.
Thank you.
I saw that we can have landing pages and work with them, but did you get any feedback from developers from the project that, enterprise projects, I mean, that tried the tool, and how was that? Maybe you know some limitations you want to share. And the other question is, of course, CSS and HTML are live standards, and given we can control them from the UI tool, how do you decide what properties we're including there? Like if something is not implemented in Firefox, for example, is it go, no go? How do you decide that? Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll answer the first one, and you'll take the second one. So regarding, if I understand the question correctly, you're talking about like the size of the team or the organization that works with it.
I mean, how does it behave on the big applications when we have a UI kit that consuming some other components from somewhere else, when we have nested and a lot of nested and inherited logic?
Yeah.
How does it behave?
So as I said, we are using Codux to build Codux. Now Codux is a very complex application. It uses external components, it uses a lot of technologies, and we do see more of use within Wix. So it can handle way more complex cases than those simple pages, but that really depends on the application and the environment. It can be set up within Codux. Some environments may be more complex and will require a bit more setup if they connect to other things, but you should be able to work with any project.
Properties are actually on TypeScript, like all the HTML attributes of an element is like a scan TypeScript, and the controllers are like from it. names, stuff like that. Is that answering your question? Partially. Thank you. Maybe we'll talk later.
Yeah, but in that way, there's no opinion of us. We just read the code and show it in the visual panels. That depends on the interface that you're creating, the way that you work. So we just an abstraction on top of that. But if it didn't answer your question, I would be very happy to do it later.
Thank you. Great.
Okay, thank you very much, and we'll be right back.